You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.
If there is a time for academics to now take on the role of saying, on the basis of the science, this is what we recommend the community do, that time is now. And so for me, this has been a sort of time of rethinking what it means to be a queer scientist right now. And for me, it means speaking truth to power.
Hello and welcome to Campus Talks, the podcast from Times Higher Education that offers insight and advice into all areas of the global university sector. I'm Eliza Compton, Deputy Editor of Campus. For this episode, to mark Pride Month, we're looking at how the research environment for LGBTQ+ academics has evolved. And I think we found the perfect person to speak to about this. When my interviewee was looking for a place to go to graduate school to work on queer sexuality in the late 1990s, she was told to wait until she was safely tenured before she pursued it, that she'd never get a job if she did, and to forget about finding grants. That risk didn't put her off though, and times changed. And she's now been studying sexuality, gender and intimate relationships and their implications for health and well-being for 30 years. But in 2026, she finds herself in a full circle moment of funding cuts and hostility to DEI initiatives. A New York Times data analysis in May 2025 found that more than $800 million worth of research into the health of LGBTQ people had been scrapped. And although legal challenges saw some of that funding restored, as you'll hear, the damage had been done. So now to introduce my guest. Lisa Diamond is Distinguished Professor in Psychology and Ethnic, Gender and Disability Studies at the University of Utah, where she's worked since 1999. She has a PhD in Human Development from Cornell, and her groundbreaking 2009 book, Sexual Fluidity, Understanding Women's Love and Desire, received a Distinguished Book Award from the American Psychological Association, among its other accolades. Last November, in the wake of sweeping funding cuts, she launched with co-principal investigator Scout of the LGBTQIA+ Cancer Network, the unfunded, all-volunteer OUT, the Community Survey, a grassroots research project into how LGBTQ+ communities, the people who care for and about them, and the queer and trans workforce have been affected by US government policy changes. Thousands responded and offered to share their stories, and the survey has now evolved into an oral history project. In talking about her work, Lisa traces the shape of her experiences as an LGBTQ+ scientist, from her field expanding into a golden age in the mid-2000s to now, when she and her colleagues are responding to LGBTQ+ health research being squashed like a bug, in her words. She does paint a grim picture, but it's one that is not without moments of levity. Our chat also contains advice about what she calls gonzo science and using data collection as a form of resistance, ways to address the loneliness and social disconnection that linger after the pandemic and affect research, what older generations who went through the AIDS crisis can teach younger cohorts, and the power of community. There are a couple of places where our Zoom connection was unstable, but I'm sure this won't take away from the impact of this conversation. So let's hear from Lisa. Hi Lisa, and welcome to the Campus Talks podcast.
It's a real pleasure to be with you.
It occurred to me as I was doing a bit of research around your career and work that you were really ahead of your time when you first began studying female sexuality in the 90s. And in some way, the culture has caught up with you in that diversity in gender and sexuality is now more visible, for example, but attacks on DEI and trans rights and identity are also very much a present reality, which would seem to undermine that progress. So, from a research perspective, what is it like for LGBTQ plus academics at the moment?
Oh God, it's like where do you begin? Challenging doesn't quite describe it. And as you said, I've been doing this work for a very long time. And what's sort of interesting is, I started out in graduate school doing research on kind of queer sexuality back when that was not a thing that was really safe to study. And a lot of people have advised me, no, you don't do that in graduate school. You have to wait until you're safely tenured if you want to do stuff like that. And so when I was looking for places to go to graduate school, there were only two kind of researchers who were even focusing on the development of sexual identity. Rich Seven Williams, who was my advisor at Cornell, and Gilbert Hurt, who was at University of Chicago. Like there weren't even places I could go to do this work. And it just was a time that the work was really ghettoized. And everyone was like, yeah, you could study that, but you'll never get a job. You can't get a grant. Like maybe you can publish on it, but how are you going to get a job? And I just sort of naively kind of persevered anyway. And it was really kind of remarkable to then witness over time, because, I graduated from Cornell in 1999. And I think the only reason I got the job that I got at the University of Utah, where I still work now, is because it was a joint appointment. It was a joint appointment with psychology and gender studies. And it was really my gender studies colleagues who kind of got what I was doing. And I think they really advocated for me to be hired. And so I feel very lucky. Like everyone's like, oh, you had this great career. I'm like, do you realize how close I came to being absolutely unemployed? Like it was a risk to try to do what I was doing. And I feel very fortunate and really lucky that I ended up at a place like Utah where I really felt like I had a home. And then it was fascinating to sort of watch, especially in the early 2000s, there started to be conversations about LGBTQ health disparities and the sort of field of LGBTQ health as like something you could actually study within traditional academia with grant funding and all the things. That really started to become a reality in the early 2000s, or the early to mid 2000s. There was a big Institute of Medicine report in 2011 that was about the health of LGBTQ populations. And that really ushered in this golden age where folks could do this sort of work from the beginning of their career and build a career on it. Like I had always had a completely heterosexual line of research as like a backup, so I could kind of have some academic credibility. And I remember, it was really exciting to see students who didn't have to do that. They could actually openly and proudly work on queer and trans populations from the beginning of their career and have that be the main thing that they were doing. And it was fascinating to witness that come about. And that has now literally been squashed like a bug under the feet of the current administration. And uh, it, it it's hard to even communicate the kind of the trauma and the grief that has happened within my research community. There's a colleague of mine, his name is Scout. He's a trans guy he's my generation, actually a couple of years older, and sort of was part of the similar sort of witnessing of like this career path, like rose up. And he's, deeply connected with all the folks doing this sort of work. So after the election, he threw together through the Cancer Network a listserv for all of the kind of sexual and gender minority health researchers around the country, and specifically asked everyone, don't use your university email. Get, a private, get your personal email account. This is how we can share information about what's happening, because the cancellations and the executive orders and the chaos that really started raining down immediately upon inauguration day. And the chatter on this listserv was just heartrending, of individuals starting to get these very weird and bizarre grant cancellation letters, because they were all written by the folks at Doge. It was like a whole bunch of angry people took over the computers at the NIH and started not just canceling the grants, but really demeaning, that this work was never actual science. And, there's just sort of a hidden history of what has happened, to this discipline that is just devastating. And it is still not clear what the end result will be. A lot of folks have left the field. Some funding was restored in some cases after lawsuits, but like there will be no renewal. It's like, yeah, we'll give you your last, year or two of funding. But, there was an entire field, an entire world of LGBTQ health that may not survive, or that may go into a long, dark, quiet period. And not to mention the fact that questions about sexual and gender identity, and especially gender identity, have been taken out of all federal health surveillance efforts. And those were the data that sort of allowed us to argue that health disparities existed. That data helped to establish the field of LGBTQ health research, because the CDC was collecting enough data so that we could say, look, you can look at what's happening to queer and trans populations. You can see their levels of kind of mental health. You can see disparities in cardiovascular disease and diabetes, and all the things that we know are related to the immune system and how they are affected by social threat and social stigma, that there is a direct line between the way we are treated by the culture and what happens to our bodies over time. But that was shuttered. And now there is no federal data collection on gender identity. So we're living through one of the greatest periods of threat to gender minority populations, in decades, but they turned the lights out on our ability to collect that data. It's hard to even describe, what's happening. It's been heartbreaking to observe.
How do you respond to that?
There are pockets of resistance. One of the things, with my collaborator, Scout, who started this listserv, we kind of quickly realized the enormity of what we were facing. And we're like, well, they don't want to collect data on our populations, and they're shutting down the grants and shutting down the federal data collection. We're like, you know what? We kind of know how to do this ourselves. So we launched a completely unfunded, all volunteer data collection effort called the Out Community Survey. And we launched it in November and kept the data collection portal open until March. And we basically targeted it toward the entire kind of queer community and their family members, because there is also a secondary toll of this on anyone who has a bond of love or care or concern with a queer or trans person. And we also distributed it to anyone in what we call the kind of queer and trans workforce. Researchers like myself, educators, gender affirming care providers, anyone in the mental health workforce, advocates, activists, because so many nonprofits have lost their funding as well. And we ended up getting over 8,000, complete responses to the survey, and we're writing up the results right now. And no one's ever done something like that. We're like, we're just going to do this with zero money, just because it has to be done. And we asked folks, give us your email address and allow us to follow you over time, because we are living through something that has never happened, in the history of this country, where there's literally an extinction threat to the trans population right now. And we cannot change it, but we can track it. And so we're going to track the hell out of it. And over 95% of the respondents gave us their email and said they would allow us to check back in with them. So now it's like, how am I surviving this moment? I mean, my own NIH grant was canceled. And I'm like, well, then I'm putting 100% of my effort toward where I need that effort to go, which is, this is an emergency for our communities. And, Scout and I just sort of realized, well, where our efforts are best put right now is to get the data and to sort of track it and be able to show what's happening. Over 5,000 people said they wanted to be interviewed about one of what's happened to their own personal lives. And we're like, well, this is no longer an interview project. This is an oral history project because we're living through history. So now we're working on trying to figure out a secure platform where people can just tell their stories, because the personal stories of what is happening around this country and internationally, a lot of folks have already moved overseas. And so it is so much larger, I think, than a lot of people realize. And I have no doubt in my mind that for decades, we will look back on 2025 being a turning point for the health of our communities. And we're just dedicated to the process of tracking what's happening, so that it doesn't at least happen in the dark, and it doesn't happen invisibly, and that we are not erased, because that is literally what they're trying to do, especially to trans communities, is erase them. Just erase their existence. That if you don't count them, they don't exist. And I had always thought in my career that we were on this positive trajectory. I'm like, wow, when I started out, things were hard, and oh my gosh, things are so great. And so to have seen the full arc where we're going all the way back to the way things were when I was a graduate student, and people were advising me, don't do this research as a graduate student, you'll never get a job. I am having those conversations with undergraduates now, who are like, oh, I want to go to graduate school and do this. And I'm like, right now, like, you also need to think about your livelihood and your safety. And I can't believe I'm giving you this advice, but now may not be the right time. Like, I have to worry about your well-being first. And 10 years ago, I would have said, fight the good fight. But I'm also deeply just worried about how safe it is to do this work. It's like the worst full circle path I've ever seen. I never could have imagined that this sort of thing could happen to, like, the NIH, to research. I always sort of thought, oh, those institutions are so big, they're impervious to that sort of political maneuvering. Well, I mean, we're just in an unprecedented time, and nobody knows where it's gonna come out.
I think the speed with which it happened was almost the most shocking thing about it, aside from the targeted nature of the actions around funding, and also around any kind of DEI or affirmative action.
Yeah.
As you're talking, I'm thinking that this part of social history has maybe a bit in common with what was going on in the 80s with the AIDS epidemic, when stories were being lost and distorted. With older researchers who have perhaps been through that, even if they went through it just as observers, as teenagers, do you think they are better equipped to cope with this moment than perhaps younger academics who have come of age at a time when it was safer to be out and visible?
I think it's a great question. It's something I've had a lot of conversations about. And, Scout and I are both always talking about the fact that we need a little more intergenerational conversations about these things. That some of us who lived through those days, it's like, we remember going through this before, and yet the tools and the strategies that got us through, we've kind of forgotten about some of them, because a lot of them involved, like, physically showing up, for one another. And the forms of protest in those days were not virtual, they were physical. People physically showed up. And we talk a lot about, queer and trans community. And yet we've actually all gotten a little bit out of the practice of showing up for one another. Like, what is a community? It's basically a series of friendships. But the social disconnection crisis is a real thing. And that is one of the other kind of hidden, kind of toxic elements of this experience right now, is that we were already in a compromised state after the pandemic. the Surgeon General released a report on the epidemic of social disconnection. And he released that report in 2023, had all these fantastic recommendations about what we need to do to reconnect ourselves because it is harming our health to be as isolated as we are. We have fewer friends. We spend less time with friends. We spend less time in community spaces. These are patterns that were going on already for a long time, but then the pandemic just made it a lot worse, and the shift to virtual work. Most of us have workplaces where we don't show up in person anymore. So this report came out in 2023, but what happened? We had an election in 2024. So that report is just sitting on the shelf, and we haven't gotten any better. There was a 2022 report on the youth mental health crisis. Well, that hasn't gotten any better. So we have a number of challenges in terms of mental health and social connection. We did a better job with that sort of stuff in the 80s. We didn't like virtually. We showed up for one another at bedsides and in hospitals and on the streets. We have gotten out of practice at the slow in-person work of bonding together. And I absolutely believe that is like, that's the lesson that we need to take from this. Like, the revolution will not take place on Meta. And by the way, they're scraping all your data. We need to get back into the habit of kind of putting our bodies, in this fight and in this kind of resistance. And so I wish we did have kind of more conversations about how we did it in the old days and what we can learn from that time. And that, yeah, clicking on a link is not going to help us. What's going to help us, and what I've tried to put a lot of my effort toward, is good old-fashioned kind of social and community connection, that it is really gathering together and providing support for one another. That I think it's the only tool in our resistance toolbox that is entirely in our control.
Yeah,
They
right.
everything else out of our hands, but they cannot take that.
And so the survey gave you an opportunity to dig into some of this.
One of the things that, Scout and I kind of asked, we get really detailed measures in that survey of what are your social connections like? How do you feel about your social network? Do you feel like you have enough friends? Do you have enough affirming friends? And then we asked folks, do you want some help? Like, if there are things you don't like about your social network and your social support environment, do you want some help changing it? Because we believe that it's the only thing that's going to save us. And over 4,000 individuals said, I want some help. I want some help with my social network. So now we're trying to figure out, okay, now what do we do, with this information? So we've been in touch with a number of folks who are trying out different kind of local interventions. How do you provide a mechanism for a parent of a trans kid in Nebraska to connect to a parent of a trans kid in Alabama and have them be able to just form a friendship, one another? How do we get people to just get together and go for walks, outside together, to just sort of escape from the virtual world and do the old-fashioned process of just walking and talking together? Humans have connected to deal with hard times as long as humans have been human. One of the oldest known fossils, it's called the Laetoli footprints. It's from something like 3.5 million years ago. It's just two sets of footprints walking, in Tanzania. And it's like, humans know how to survive, and that survival is one another. Like, it is the oldest form of resilience and resistance out there, and now's the time for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine too that when you're talking about the kind of research that you do, so qualitative research, that actually all these kinds of social skills are incredibly important as well in terms of collecting stories and getting an accurate picture of, say, of communities or individual experiences. And I keep reading over and over that things like social media, working from home, digital isolation are taking away those
Yeah.
abilities to communicate with each other, which seems terribly sad to me, I have to say.
Well, it's hard to empathize with a screen.
Yeah.
Um, When someone is on a screen, we're now all very accustomed to interacting on screens. And the truth is that a screen is something you can turn off. And so even a live, real-time FaceTime interaction, it's still a screen. And we just don't respond to screens the way we respond to humans. And I think there are benefits of the ability of digital technologies to allow a personal story to be told on TikTok or on there's definitely benefits to these technologies for getting human stories out. But at the end of the day, if we spend more time on screens and less time in person, that is not how our empathy is activated. We need to kind of get off the screens and be in person.
Yeah, empathy is so incredibly important, isn't it? Just for contented human life, as well as more accurate research. With all this, are you tempted to go back into activism or to shift towards
Well,
activism?
so a lot of the work that I've done, since the election with Scout, we sort of view data collection is activism at this point. Storytelling is activism. We're now trying to figure out a way for the over 5,000 people in our survey who wanted to be interviewed. We're trying to set up a sort of mechanism for them to sort of archive their own personal stories. And so we sort of view the data as a form of activism that yeah, you don't want to collect data on us, we're going to do it ourselves. That is our form of resistance. Everybody has their part to play in the fight. We are scientists. That's how we move through the world. And I think I've definitely taken a more sort of activist stance in my work than before. We both just wrote a paper that will be coming out in the annual review of sex research, where we sort of lay out, based on the evidence, what health effects we can expect to see over the next 5 to 20 years as a result of the actions that took place in 2025. We sort of made a table of every single thing the administration did and when, by date, that affected our communities. The executive orders, changes in a lot of guidance to hospitals, the fact that, hospitals, federal funding is cut if they provide, we listed out every sort of thing and we say, this is why it's different than everything we've seen before. The speed is a part of it, the scope, the sweeping nature of it, that a lot of previous legislative attacks on our communities were at the state level. So folks could always talk about, well, I'll move to a different state. Well, now you can't escape it. It's across the entire country. It's at a federal level. And we used to call these things structural stigma. That's the academic term for some of these state level, oh, we're going to do this in Florida or, Utah or wherever. And one of the things we argue in the paper is that that term is no longer appropriate. And we say we're now in a different state. We want to coin the term institutionalized animus, because that's what it is. It is institutionalized hatred for a certain subset of the population. And we sort of conclude the paper by saying, normally in a paper like this, you review the literature and then you say, this is what we should focus on in future research. And we say, that doesn't really make sense right now, right? So that's not the conclusion we're going to draw. We end the paper by just making a radical argument that now it is time for our community to invest 1,000% in social connection, that we are facing a public health threat of such significance that came upon so quickly. And our survey, we wrote the paper before we had finished collecting the data. And I texted him and I'm like, oh, the good news is that we were right. The bad news is that we were right, that it really is going to be this bad. And so the end of the paper is a lot more activist and advocacy oriented than a normal academic paper. And even the reviewers were like, this is sort of unusual. The tone of this paper is a little bit more advocacy oriented. And, you might want to think about toning that down. And we were like, no, we're not, because that's where we're at. And luckily I feel like I've been in this field long enough that I'm like, no, well, the first half of the paper is a really traditional academic review. But then at the end, it's like, if there is a time for academics to now take on the role of saying, on the basis of the science, this is what we recommend the community do, that time is now. And so for me, this has been a sort of time of rethinking what it means to be a queer scientist right now. And for me, it means uh, speaking truth to power. And, my job is secure. Yes, I lost my grant, but I'm not facing a risk to my job the way that a lot of younger academics are. So, Scout and I both sort of feel like it is our responsibility, if we are more kind of secure, to say the things that maybe our junior colleagues can't.
So the study that you and Scout are working on, this is ongoing?
No, the data collection closed on, I think, March 15th. So what we did is we immediately produced a bunch of state-specific reports. So for any state, because we partnered with like 95 different community organizations to help publicize. And what we said to a lot of the organizations is like, you help us get participants from your state and then we'll give you your state's findings. So we just finished pumping out something like 35 different reports for any state that managed to get more than 100 responses. So we state report for Florida, for California, for Arizona. And so now we're working on the kind of national reports, and we're going to be submitting them for publication, hopefully in the American Journal of Public Health. So it's sort of like gonzo science. It's like activist science. Like they didn't want to fund it, so we just decided we were going to do it ourselves. But it is stark. I think almost like 80% of folks say their anxiety has increased over the past year. Over 70% of folks said their symptoms of depression have increased. Substance use is increasing. PTSD, feelings of hopelessness and loneliness. We're living through a very, very dark time, with regard to mental health. And all we can do is make sure it doesn't happen in the dark.
Yeah, yeah. How are you fitting this, or how do you fit this work in with other commitments? So teaching work, admin, service work, how does that all fit in for you?
It's interesting. It's a challenge. I mean, academic life is already a challenge, and certainly, administratively, that's another tricky thing, because I know at the University of Utah, like a lot of other universities, everything related to DEI has been kind of suppressed. And that happened even before the election, because we had passed an anti-DEI bill so that we can't even use the words diversity. Like we had a diversity committee at the psych department. Well, now that's called the, I think, like accessibility community, something like we're all doing this fancy dancing because we can't talk about diversity. We can't talk about inclusion. We used to hold a lavender graduation every year for all the queer students on campus. We couldn't hold that on campus anymore. All of the student affinity groups, the LGBTQ Resource Center, the Women's Resource Center, the Black Cultural Center, the Center for Equity and Student Belonging, they were all shut down. They don't exist anymore. And that's happening across the country as well. So that has been an additional hurdle, because I used to feel that the campus was another place, where our activism could go, creating, spaces, intellectual spaces for students to talk about these issues. And that has become harder and harder. Like it's still possible within the classroom setting, but that has also been a challenge. And I think a lot of us just feel that the traditional levers through which we could push forward inclusion and political thought at the university, that has become more controversial and more dangerous. And so that's been challenging. And then AI has made teaching a new nightmare. Now, I don't assign writing in my classes anymore. I have students make presentations. I have them, create videos. Like in some ways it's been good. It's kind of made me think more strategically about how to create a classroom environment that is friendly to neurodivergence, to multiple ways of thinking, that the research paper isn't the only way to assess learning, but that is challenging too. So we're like facing these attacks kind of on multiple fronts. I mean, academic life is no longer what it used to be. It is a different animal. And we're in this period of upheaval, and all of higher education is experiencing, upheaval right now. And so it's a little bit, I think we all have whiplash. It's all happening so fast, and we're trying to cope and we're trying to catch up, and a million experiments are blooming. Some of them will work, some of them won't, but it has added to the challenge of this moment. Nothing about this job is the way it was 5 years ago. Like nothing. It's it's like being in a washing machine sometimes.
Mm. Universities are really up against it, aren't they? Everywhere.
It's all happening so fast that, I've tried to just keep my ears and eyes open because, it's too complicated for us just to be like, oh, admin is terrible and the folks in charge aren't supporting us. There definitely are individuals who are trying to support gender studies, ethics, like all the kind of radical progressive forms of intellectual engagement. There are folks within university systems who are doing their best to advocate, but they just face challenges that we never faced before. And it's just still really uncertain what higher education is going to look like in 5 to 10 years. So there's a bunch of challenges that coexist with the threats to, say, the LGBTQ community. It's like everyone's just got to keep their eyes and ears open and hold on to the furniture, and it'll be interesting to see what survives and what doesn't.
When you're talking to students, whether it's undergraduates or your graduate students, what are they telling you about this moment and how they're feeling about their studies and their futures?
Uncertainty. I mean, if there's one word that captures it, uncertainty. It's like everyone feels like they're on ground that's moving. And, what do they major in? What do they focus on? Do they take time off? What is the role of education in a career? There's just a heck of a lot of uncertainty out there. And one of the things I know as a psychologist is that uncertainty is a brain state that humans hate. We find it extremely stressful, and we're not very good at making decisions, in uncertain situations. And so that, I think, is the big theme right now, is uncertainty.
Yeah, we're not very well equipped to deal with it.
They want advice on like what to do, and I say to them, I'll be honest with you, I know as little about the future as you do. But the one thing I have said over and over is because of that, because I can't tell you, what's going to be a secure path or not. It also kind of gives you permission to sort of connect with your soul and say, well, there's not a big motivation to sell out for the sake of economic security, because nobody knows what economic security even means anymore. So therefore, take seriously what your heart wants to do. Like if, in the old days, oh, I want to be an artist, but my mom wants me to be a lawyer because that's more secure. I'm like, well, that's not secure anymore. A lot of junior associate positions may disappear because there's a lot of folks in the legal profession who think that, AI is very good at contract law. So maybe the legal profession is not a secure bet anymore. So I said, if that's true, then allow it to give you permission to think seriously about what you want to do with your one wild and precious life. If all of these secure, boring options are no longer so secure, then take seriously where your passions are. That's kind of how I'm trying to get through this moment.
Just as one final question, I could talk to you for hours, but alas, we do not have that time. There must be some chinks of light in these dark clouds. Where do you see them?
Mm, there's a book called What Happened to You. And what Bruce Perry kind of points out in this book is that if you look across the historical record and across different cultures, there are certain things that humans always do in periods of trauma and adversity. And, they're kind of like human pillars for healing. And they involve things that are all within our control. Connection to clan, right? Social connection, connection to nature and the outdoors, meaning making, whether that's art, whether it's storytelling, making meaning out of what's happening, to you. And I love this one, rhythmic movement and sound, that across different cultures, what people do when they're experiencing trauma and adversity is they come together and they stomp and they drum and they shout and they chant and they move. And like when I was reading that, I was just remembering what it was like, to be queer in the 90s during the AIDS crisis, and house music. That what did we do? We gathered and we danced and we screamed and we pulsed, and we were living through an existential threat, but we did it together, moving, singing, dancing, stomping, marching. We have within us as humans the ability to get through this moment. It's our birthright as humans. We need to come together. We need to get off our screens and go outdoors and experience awe and transcendence. We now know from a lot of cognitive neuroscience that our brains go into a different state when we are experiencing awe, when we're aware of something larger than ourselves. I was just in southern Utah this past weekend, and just, looking at these enormous red rock canyons, bigger than your brain can hold. And what that does is it shifts our brain into a state where we transcend our current moment. We transcend ourselves. That's good for us. And so what I say to folks is, we have those tools all around us. Grab onto one another, go outside, march and stomp and dance and sing, and look at things that give you an awareness of the vastness of the universe, the vastness of this planet. There's an experience called soft fascination that individuals often have in nature, where you focus in on something, but not in a stressful way, in a mode of curiosity and engagement. That's good for our brains too. We already have all around us and within us everything we need to get through this moment. We just have to double down on that. Get off the screens, grab your friends, waste time together, moving through nature and sharing your story and drawing meaning from what's already all around you. And that, I think, is what's going to get us from this moment to the next.
Oh, well, look, what an uplifting piece of insight and advice for us to end this conversation, Lisa. I love that. I'm going to go and dance my way through the weekend, I think, now.
Yay! Well, this has been fantastic fun.
Thank you so much for your time and inspiring light in these darker moments. This interview struck me really powerfully. Firstly, and most importantly, as a call to action. That is to support the LGBTQ plus community, of course, but broadly also for higher education, raising questions about how the sector can respond to the uncertainties around its future, what the place of diversity actually is within it, the funding landscape, and the spectre of AI. That action might be personal. It might be students seizing this time to follow their passions rather than taking the traditional safe path, for example, or finding safety and community on the dance floor. Or it might be, as Lisa and Scout have done, researchers taking data collection into their own hands in the form of gonzo science, or leaning into advocacy and activism to speak truth to power. That brings us to the end of this episode of Campus Talks. I'd like to thank my guest, Lisa Diamond from the University of Utah, for generously sharing her story and insights. For more advice about how universities and individuals can support the LGBTQ+ community in the academy and on their own campuses, please check out our latest Spotlight collection. You'll find it at timeshighereducation.com/campus. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend or colleague, leave us a comment, like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.